Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio with a nice little project today, actually, and something a little bit different. Now, I was given some of the new Tilda Merry Little Christmas fabric to work with and said, would I come up with a little project to do with that? And so I've made this adorable, even though, can I say that about my own work? I think I can, pillowcase. I really love it. And I've actually done it out of 3 different fabrics. If I just sort of turn that round, you can see I've got a different fabric on the back. And it's a really useful one that you don't necessarily need huge cuts of fabric to get to this. It's got a cuff, so there's no raw edges. We've done French seams, we've done a cuff, and we've also got a little piece of fabric here which covers the pillow, so that you've got like an English type pillowcase. So we're going to recreate that here today. Now it's got this lovely little sort of, Katrina calls it a fillet, other people, I tend to call it a flange, but this lovely little sort of decorative feature today. And instead of doing that just as a straight fillet or flange, I'm actually going to do a ruffle. We recently did a little tutorial on some different ruffles, and I actually think it'd be nice to put a little ruffle there instead. So we're going to change it up a little bit, but actually in terms of the basic construction of the pillowcase, I'm going to show you how I did it. So I worked off an English or a UK sized pillow, which are 29 by 19 inches. So of course, if you're in the US, I think your pillow sizes are slightly different. So you may need to adjust measurements accordingly. And hopefully I'll sort of cover a little bit about how you might be able to do that at the end. So let's have a look at what we're going to need for this particular size. So let me just set that aside for the moment. So I've got my fabrics here. As I said, this is Tilda's Merry Little Christmas, and they're beautiful fabrics, and some of them aren't overly Christmas. So this is definitely one I could see me using all year round. So I'll show you, I've picked out 3 different prints for that one and 3 slightly different prints for this one. So you can begin to see some of the fabrics in the range, but there are a lot more beautiful fabrics in the range for this. So for this, as I said, we're going to need 3 fabrics. We need a fabric for the pillowcase cuff, and I'm going to use this red one for that. And the size for that is 14.5 by 20.5. Now 20.5 is the height of our pillow. So the 14.5 is the width, and that's actually going to be folded double. So that's going to finish at 7 inches. So that's the cuff. Now for the little fillet or flange, that is 20.5 again. I did 2.5 on this one, but because I'm going to ruffle this, I've actually made it slightly bigger, and I'm doing 2 3/4 on this. And that's just to allow the ruffles so that it actually looks sort of a decent size. It's not, for your eye, you're probably not going to notice too much difference, but for me to work with, I decided to add that extra 1/4 inch. Now at the moment, I've kept that width of fabric because of course I've got to make my ruffles. So I've kept that width of fabric, but that needs to end up at 20.5 inches. And that is also folded double. I've ironed that in half. Now for the front main body of the pillow, there's this piece of fabric, and it's 20.5 again this way, but it's 23 inches that way. Now just be careful, this one is a directional fabric, so you can see here this is one of the more Christmassy prints in the range. If you've got a directional fabric which isn't so obvious, one of the, because it looks very similar in size, it almost looks square, this piece of fabric, but it's not. So my top tip is, if you want it to lay a particular direction, put a pin in where the top is. And that's just then the visual reminder of, oh yeah, that's the top, that's where I'm working. So there's that piece. And then finally, the back piece, which is also going to wrap round, and we're going to have a little flap fold over in the inside there to cover the pillow form. That piece is 20.5 again by 37 inches. So that's the largest piece that we need. Now, if you wanted to do the main body and the back out of one piece of fabric, and I need to check my measurements here, you would need a piece that is 20.5 by 59 inches, I worked out. But I actually like it with that different fabric on the back. So there are pieces, so I'm going to, for the moment, set this one aside. That's the back piece. We're going to come back to that. And the first thing I'm going to do is take my front pieces and I'm going to lay it out like this. Now I'm going to put the cuff on the right hand side. So my direction, as I said, my pin's at the top. So this is going to attach there. But before I put those two together, I'm actually going to make the ruffle. Now, if you were just going to put the band in, you can just lay that and tack that into place there at this point. But I'm just going to quickly take this to the machine and start doing a little ruffle with this. Now, before I start, I'm actually going to leave a little bit of flat bit because I don't want a lot of bulk because we're going to do French seams. So I'm actually going to leave a piece at the beginning that's sort of quite flat before I start to ruffle. Now, one thing just to say, the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that I'm working on a slightly different machine here today, and this is the Brother VQ2 that we also now have to use in the studio. And bear with me, I'm still learning this machine, but I do have a Brother embroidery machine, which is very similar operation, so hopefully I will get to this, used to this one very quickly. So I've got my 1/4 inch foot on, but I actually want to do a tacking stitch, so I'm just going to move my fabric over. So I'm probably just sewing probably about 1/8 inch there. I'm also going to increase my stitch length to probably something, maybe about a 4. Should be fine. And I've just got this on a straight stitch with the needle in the centre. So off we go. So there it is, we've done the ruffle. Now, I've just sort of done that by eye and it's come out fairly even. I'm not too worried for it to be exact. If you want it more exact, actually, you know, you can make some marks and make sure that you're getting that all pretty even, but it's a nice decorative feature. So as I said, I'm not too worried. Now, all I need to do, because that's probably going to be more than 20.5 inches long, is just trim that down to size. Okay, so there's the ruffle made. Now I haven't trimmed it exactly to 20.5 because it's sort of always easier to fit a slightly longer piece on. We can always trim it off a little bit. And all I'm doing there is just taking out those stitches that's holding that last little ruffle on that side. Because as I said, just to give myself a little bit of a flatter piece there so that we don't end up with lots of bulk in the seam. Yeah, okay. So we're ready to start assembling. So we're going to take our main body piece, and we will of course put the measurements for all these pieces in the description box. So I'm just going to place this ruffle on top, aligning those raw edges. And I'm just going to go and pin all the way down. Now if you wanted to tack this to the main body of the bag, the pillowcase, sorry, not a bag, you can of course do that. But I'm just going to pin for now, and then we're going to sew it all in one. But as I said, if you're more comfortable tacking this in, you can. And I would just go over the stitches you've already done to make the ruffle if you're doing that ruffled, the ruffled version. Right, so those two are attached. Now we're going to get the cuff, and there is a slight direction in this, but I don't think it matters too much. So once again, we've got our 20.5 inch width that way, our 14.5 that way. We're going to have that face up, and we're now going to put this bit onto this right hand edge of the cuff. So that's how that goes there, and then we're going to repin. Just making sure I line up those side edges when I do this bit, as well as the raw edges on the outside here. So just take your time with this. It's not complicated, and it is worth just taking the time. Now we've done, I'm going to take that pin because that's going to be out the way. We've done this method before in cushions, and we're actually going to sort of roll this up now. So we're going to take this bottom end, and this is the main body of the pillowcase. Oh, let's move those pins out of the way before I do something silly with them. Oh, and that one. We're just going to roll it up. And I'm going to roll it up until it comes about halfway of the cuff. Now I'm just going to grab a couple of clips. I just like to clip that into place. And then we're going to take this bottom edge of the cuff and we're going to bring it up and over. So let me just show that again. So we've got that rolled up in the middle. I'm going to take this bottom edge of the cuff and bring it over so that it meets that raw edge there. So that's what that one should look like. So all our raw edges are matching there. And that main body, and I'm going to keep that clipped because that will just keep it out of the way when we're sewing. Just make sure that nothing gets caught. And then we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to do 1/4 inch all the way along that bottom edge. So there's that all sewn. I'm going to remove my clips. And then we're going to reach the inside here and just pull out that inside main body of the pillowcase. And there you should have something that looks like that. Now let me just take that to the iron and give it a press, but you can see there that seam is all enclosed there, so there's no raw edge. And we've got a nice finished cuff on that pillowcase. So let me take that to the iron and just give that a press, and then I'm also just going to trim off that little bit of excess ruffle. There we are, so that's the front of our pillowcase, all made. Now as an optional extra, you can just go back in and do a little top stitch along that edge. If I just bring this one in and put it under the close-up, you can sort of see I've just got a little bit, it's a little bit tone on tone, but I've just done a little top stitch there. But it's completely optional, but I think it just makes the pillowcase look a little bit more finished. Now just for time's purposes today, I'm not going to do that. Now we're going to work on putting the back together. I'm finishing that off. Now, let me just move that out of the way and move that out of the way and bring our back piece of fabric in. Now also, just be mindful if you've got a directional fabric again, on which way this is going to go on the back of the cushion, pillow. So that, once again, my top is there. So I'm going to position that as if that is going to be the pillowcase. So I know that the edge I'm going to be attaching to the bottom of the front is this edge here. Okay, so that's just to determine which side we're working on. So I'm going to put a pin there to show me that's the bit that's going to go onto the pillowcase. Because then if we flip that over, everything's in the right orientation. So we need to finish this edge. So to do that, I'm just going to do a double fold hem. And all we mean by that is we're going to turn over this edge. And I tend to turn it over by about 1/2 inch. Now I tend to do it by eye. But you can pin that. But I'm just going to take that to the iron and just sort of fold over that edge. And then once it's folded over, I'm going to fold it over again. And then we'll come back and top stitch that. So I've just lined up a point on my foot to just give me that top stitch edge. So I've gone along this top edge and I'm just, because this is quite wide and so that doesn't flap about, I'm just going to go again, but I'm actually going to do it from the underside this time. Now I love this 1/4 inch foot because you've actually got this little sort of section here. Let me just take that off and show it to camera actually. you can see you've got sort of these little sections here, and that piece there gives you 1/8. So I'm actually going to use that as the outside of my line to just come back through and just put this into place. Like I say, this is going to be on the inside of the pillowcase, but we want to get it as neat as we can make it. There we are. So I'm just going to tidy up that edge there, neaten that up, take away the threads. But there it is, and if I just put that under the close-up, you can see there we've got the 2 lines of stitching, and that's all held nice and firm, and that means that when we're washing it, it's going to be nice and durable, and everything's going to be nice and neat on the inside. So now we're ready to put the whole thing together. So we want to make, oh, you can keep seeing, I keep moving that pillow. Let's move my book, my notes over there. We want to make this back piece the same length as our front piece. So I'm just going to lay the 2 together, one on top of the other. And I'm actually going to just put a couple of pins in just to help hold it. Now I've given it, so you should have about a 6-inch sort of overlap. And then I'm just going to lay it flat, get another pin and sort of mark where that meets that piece there and where that meets that piece there. And then we can just fold that over at those points, and we should be pretty close. I'm going to give that a little bit of a press just to help hold it. Just a quick press, because we may need to do a little bit of adjustment again. Now I'm going to unpin it from there, take that pin out. And I'm going to lay one on top of the other. And see how we did. And now I'm going to go around and pin both of those together, and I'm putting them purposely wrong sides together because we're going to do a French seam. So it's always a little bit counterintuitive when you do a French seam, because we're used to putting everything right sides together, aren't we? But for a French seam, we want to start wrong sides together. Lots of pinning in this project. The people that know me will be going, Jeanette, that's a lot of pinning. But I always say I do pin where it's necessary. So, and this is definitely one where I feel it's necessary. This fabric's beautiful. I love it. Absolutely gorgeous. These would make perfect gifts. Absolutely perfect gifts. So, yeah, I'm happy with where those folds are sitting. I think we've got that pretty good on that fold. So I'm going to now pay special attention to where your ruffles are, because we don't want those flipping as we're sewing them. So I'm actually going to pin through those to try and help keep those in place. A couple more pins. Okay, one more there. One more there. Okay, so I'm now going to sew down one side along the bottom and up the other side. And I'm going to actually do it with sort of either 1/4 inch. You might want to go a little bit of a scant 1/4 inch, but I've designed it so you can sew it with 1/4 inch. So I'm going to go all the way around that with our normal stitch. Now I'm probably going to do a fairly small stitch because we want this to be a nice strong seam, so I'm probably going to do it at a 2.0. You could go up to a 2.5, but anything around there. Now my other top tip is, because this is going to be a finished edge, I don't want the tails of where I've started to be right in the edge. So I'm actually going to start a little way in on the fabric, and I'm going to reverse back and come forward. So when I clip my ends of my thread, they're actually going to be a little way in, not outside. I'm just checking I've got that. Definitely the fabric the right side round, and I have. So I'm going to start a little way in, probably about an inch or so. Now I've put my pins far enough back that I can leave them in as I'm sewing. I'm not going to be hitting them with anything. And I've stopped a quarter of an inch away, left my needle down, and I'm going to pivot. Oh, I need to do one more stitch. And once again, instead of finishing right on the edge here, I'm going to get to the end, reverse back and cut my thread when I get back here. Okay, so we've gone round. I can take my pins out now. Now I'm going to give that all a quick press, and then I'm going to trim that back a little bit, and that will do two things. It will take away any of the straggly threads, but it'll mean that when we come to do the final seam of the French seam, we make sure we've caught all of that seam within the second seam. So you can see here we've got these sort of straggly ends. We want to get rid of those before we do the next step. So I'm actually going to trim this seam down to 1/8. So you can see there, that's our seam. Okay, so we're ready for the final step. I'm going to turn this inside out. And we're going to get our seams to lay nice and flat. So I'm going to need to take that to the iron again. The more precise we can be at this stage, the better our French seam will be. So it is worth taking the time just to get everything nice and positioned in the right place. So as I said, it's not difficult, a little bit time consuming, but really do make sure you make the time to go around and get those seams matched on top of each other as best you can, because like I say, it makes the next step a lot easier and it will make the result a lot nicer. So it takes a little bit of time, but don't rush it. Just take your time and do it. So now we're ready for our final seam. So we're just going to go around again. So we've got wrong sides together here, and we're going to go those same 3 seams down one side, across the bottom, up the other side. Now I'm just going to give it a sort of a generous quarter of an inch, because we need to make sure that we catch that original seam in this second seam, but that's also why we trimmed it down, so that we should be able to do that. So let's just go and sew our final seam, and then our pillowcase will be done. And once again, I'm going to start a little bit further in. And there it is, with the exception of just trimming back a few threads here. We've got a finished pillowcase. So let's turn it the right way out. I won't take the time to faff too much, but you want to just push out all your corners nice and neatly. Just go around, just make sure you've caught all your seams. Anywhere where you've got any threads poking through, you shouldn't have too much if you've trimmed that back, so they should have got trimmed off. We can give that a final press. So let's turn it that way round for the camera. But there you can see we've got a lovely decorative, this time with a little ruffle on the pillowcase edge. Nice cuff, it's all finished on the inside, no raw seams. We've got a little flap so that will cover our pillow while we're in there, and we've got a pillowcase. Now this one comes out at 29 by 19, and as I said, that's to fit a UK sized pillow. So if you're in the US, you may need to just alter those measurements slightly to do that. So much fun. They're actually fairly easy to do. Fairly easy, I say, because there are some techniques in there, but they're all doable. Just take your time and it's, you know, sort of step by step sort of process for doing it. But you can sort of do them without a band or a cuff. You could just have sort of the cuff and the main body, or a ruffle. You could have just the main body, but I like the fact that actually we've got a different fabric on the back as well. But you could have all of that main body and the back as a fabric. As I said, we'll put the measurements in the description. I'm sure that when we put our Merry Little Christmas Tilda display up, these will probably go into the window here in the shop, so everybody can come and have a look at those. But they're absolutely beautiful fabrics, like I say, not necessarily just for Christmas, definitely ones that you could use all year round, with the exclusion of some of the more Christmassy prints, but they're just absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't stop stroking the fabric. It's absolutely lovely. Now, just a word for our US viewers, if you wanted to work out how to do different size pillows. Now, I haven't done the maths on it, but just to let you know, how I worked was I took the measurements. Now, for the French seams, I added 3/4 of an inch. So that would be 1.5 inches for both edges for the sides and 3/4 of an inch for the bottom to both the back and the front piece. So if you need to upsize that or downsize it even for a little travel pillow, that's the measurements I worked with. The cuff seam, you want double the quantity plus 1/2 inch for seam allowance. So I went with a 7-inch finished, so we cut that at 14.5. And then the back seam, for the flap, you want the length of the cushion back plus your seam allowance plus however big you want to make your cuff, and you can do anything from 6 to 8 inches for that. So hopefully that gives you some sort of basic measurements that you can tweak and sort of alter to make some different sizes as well. So I had so much fun. As I said, these fabrics are just absolutely gorgeous, absolutely beautiful, and just make wonderful, wonderful pillowcases, as well as lots of other, I'm sure, different Christmas projects. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you give these pictures a go. Pillowcases. If you do, please take some pictures, share them with us on Instagram and Facebook. You can also email them directly in. So thank you for that. Thanks for spending some time with me here today, and I hope you'll join us again here next time in the sewing studio.